Sup sup. Today we're going to be going over AP Euro's Unit 5 in today's kekw review. So Unit 5 is going to be quite the interesting unit, as it's slightly more important than the previous 4, but it's not really the most important unit to remember. Just a reminder, the reason why this review is called a kekw review is because if you're studying late for the AP Euro test, I'm going to be kekwing at your face. So without any more delays, let's get straight into this AP Euro kekw review, Unit 5, the French Revolution. So, what exactly are we going to be discussing today? Today we're going to be discussing the French Revolution, the different phases in the French Revolution. We're going to be talking about Napoleon Bonaparte, the Congress of Vienna, and the impacts that the French Revolution actually had in the long term, right? So let's go over each of them briefly. So the French Revolution was a revolution that happened in France, yeah, right? So the French Revolution was a revolution that happened in France. Basically what happened was King Louis XVI got dethroned. They killed him, right? And then they made a constitutional monarchy, and then they replaced so it went from absolute monarch to constitutional government to absolute monarch. Yeah, and a lot of people died. So there were 4 major events that took place in the French Revolution, right? So the first event that took place in the French Revolution was that the Estates General is called. You can see that in the top left here, the Estates General. So King Louis had a problem, and he called the Estates General to solve the problem, and it was probably economic based, to be honest. It was an economic based problem because France was broke from participating in too many wars. So France was broke, they had a problem, and King Louis was like, hey, Estates General, can you help me solve this problem? And by calling on the Estates General, King Louis effectively diminished his own power and handed it over to the Estates General to solve his problem for him. After that, King Louis gets taken off, he gets dethroned, and he gets executed, as seen right here. And the dictatorship, the monarchy, is effectively replaced with a constitutional government called a directory. Now, I say constitutional, but it really was just another absolute dictatorship, but not really a dictatorship because it was multiple people. Basically what happened was anyone who spoke out against the government was immediately killed. Anyone who said anything bad was immediately killed, and if you were thought of committing treason, you were automatically killed. And a lot of people were killed, sent to the guillotine, just like King Louis here, right? So after that, the directory, right? After the directory, we see the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, effectively, Napoleon Bonaparte comes in, he stages a military coup, and he takes over the government. And Napoleon would go on to basically take over the entirety of Europe, right? He launched the Napoleonic Wars, in which he took the French army, and he basically just invaded everyone and just took over everything. Cool. Now let's take a look at Napoleon Bonaparte, right? So Napoleon, technically, okay, Napoleon was a tyrant, right? Because he overthrew a legitimate government, technically, because again, that legitimate government overthrew the absolute monarchy that came before it. So technically he's a tyrant. He went on to control a majority of Europe by starting the Napoleonic Wars. He went in and he fought everyone. He was like, yeah, and he won, and he just kept winning. He went on a massive winning streak, right? He just took over all of Europe. And then he went to Russia, and they were like, hey guys, don't you think we should turn back? You know, it's kind of cold, it's kind of snowy, and all of our people are sick and dying. Napoleon was like, nah, let's keep going, right? And then he ended up losing because the Russian winter is kind of OP. And guess what? This man was exiled not once, but twice, because of the fact that he came back. He was able to come back once because of his public support. And again, this shows that a dictator can rule if he has the support of the public, right? So the Congress of Vienna. The Congress of Vienna is an event that takes place after Napoleon, right? So the Congress of Vienna is also known as the Concert of Europe, and it was a result of the Napoleonic War and Napoleon's takeover on Europe. This kind of brings to light the wanting to keep a balance of power in Europe, because they don't want one particular country getting too powerful and just coming in and rampaging and destroying everybody else, right? This would be the base behind a lot of future alliances and enemies, as they want to keep the power relatively balanced so one country just doesn't get too powerful. And countries agreed to step in to stop revolutions, but they would only stop the revolution if it was in their favor, meaning one of their allies, they were facing a revolution, or if it was themselves, then they would step in to stop the revolution. Smaller countries, they didn't really care. Impacts of the French Revolution. So some of the impacts that the French Rev had on the long term, right, was we saw the rise of more nationalist thoughts. The reason for this is, you remember how I said that Napoleon kind of took over the entirety of Europe? Yeah, even though France ruled over basically the entirety of mainland Europe, not all Europeans wanted to be considered French, right? If you were living in, I assume if you were living in Germany, right, and you were being ruled by France, I assume you would want to be called German, not French, right? So basically, because of Napoleon, we see the rise of nationalism as people pay more attention to what country they're from and which country they identify with, rather than which country they're being occupied by. So this even translates into like thought process right now, where like the whole situation with Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't want to be a part of Russia, even though a majority of Ukraine's population is in fact Slavic. They don't want to be a part of Russia, even though Russia is mostly Slavic as well, because they're not Russia. Makes sense? Cool. So this is actually one of the biggest impacts that we see long term from the French Rev, is the rise of nationalism. The French Revolution playlist project was a project that I did along with my table mates a long time ago, probably in the beginning of the year. I'll link it down in the description if you're interested. But basically, we had to quote song lyrics that have something to do with the French Revolution, and I ended up making a bunch of the songs. I was gonna write a bunch more, but then my Euro teacher, she stopped me, and I was like, dang, that's unfortunate. So yeah, I'll link that below if you're interested. And thank you so much for watching this episode of AP Euro kekw Review. Unit 5, the French Revolution. Unit 6 will be out tomorrow. I will be working on that for you guys. And remember, don't study too late for the AP Euro test, or else I'm going to be kekw at you guys for the rest of time. Thank you so much for watching once again. My name is Alec, and this has been an episode of AP Euro kekw Review. Kekw.